Start. Dobro večer. Good evening. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being with us at this exotic time slot, 8 to 9:30. It is Wednesday. There's no Champions League tonight, so there's quite a lot of attendance and participation, which is great. Let me start thanking the organizers who recognize the importance of this topic and have placed it on the agenda on this first day. We have a fantastic panel tonight with some great panelists, and I would like to welcome and thank Alida, Pavel, Ivan, Natasha, and Peter for agreeing to speak on this issue and being with us tonight. I would also like to thank some people from the audience. Minister, thank you for coming. As advertised, WFD is supporting and sponsoring this discussion tonight. Before introducing our panelists, I would like to answer maybe a couple of questions and ask a few questions. And the first question that we got quite a lot in the last year, coming to WFD, to colleagues in London, to colleagues in the Western Balkans, was why on earth is WFD working on immigration issues? Is this what you do now? We thought you provided support to parties and to parliaments. You provide political consulting. Why all of a sudden you are doing work around this issue? The second question is, why is WFD more visible now in the Western Balkans? And visible on issues which are not traditional, let's say, British issues for support in the Balkans. And finally, I hope that we're going to get some answers on how are migrations connected to political alienation, democratic culture, and democratic resilience from our panelists. Hopefully I can provide some answers now in the introduction, but the key answers will be provided by the panelists. So please don't feel pressured to deliver in your 10-minute interventions. On WFD, I mean, as probably you are aware, we are a very specifically British brand, a British organization. We have been created in 1992 by the FCO. So in fact, we are in a way owned by the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. And although we do have a management agreement with them, we are organizationally independent from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So this puts us in a very unique position as an organization to do work across the world. We call ourselves the UK public body dedicated to supporting democracy around the world. And we are a public body, a non-departmental public body. So unlike other political foundations, we are very closely connected to FCO and to the government. We now have offices in about 30 countries around the world. Around 150 staff work for us. And we primarily share and rely on UK political experience, on UK democratic culture and practices. We have been present in the Western Balkans since 1992, primarily through support provided through political parties. But in the last 10 years, we are more visible with support provided to parliaments, to electoral bodies, to independent institutions. To those that follow more closely the work of various political foundations, you've probably seen us more visible in the Balkans in the last 2 years. And I come now to the question on why. Why are we more visible as a UK political organization in the Western Balkans? Well, it's very simple. In 2008, there was a big report published by the House of Lords, which was called The UK and the Future of the Western Balkans. And this report recommended continuous engagement by various British organizations in the Western Balkans, our foundation being one of them. In July 2018, as you know, the UK hosted the Western Balkans Summit in London. I was there. Some people called it successful. Some people called it less successful. But it was successful for many reasons. And one of the reasons why I think it was successful is because the UK really showed commitment to the region. In the last 3 years, there has been an increased delivery of finances and programs for the Western Balkans. Probably if you have followed the work that we do with foundations, there was a GGF program a few years ago which was £20 million, then it grew to 40, it grew to 60, next year is going to be £80 million, and this is now all delivered in all the countries of the Western Balkans. So as the UK is dealing with Brexit issues. On the Western Balkans, we are seeing more engagement by various British foundations and organizations, including us, the British Councils, and others. In September 2018, we launched a 3-year, 4.7 million program, which is called the Western Balkans Democracy Initiative. We have offices in Albania, Bosnia, now North Macedonia, Serbia, Kosovo, and Montenegro. And you're probably going to see us working on more or less, what we call less conventional topics, and immigration is one of them. And this comes now to the part where we say why this is so. Well, the reason is we have changed our approach. We have decided to do more problem-based programming. We're moving from needs-based and capacity-based programming to problem-based programming. And problem-based programming is distinctly different from other types of programs. One of the reasons for that is that problem-based programming looks at intractable or wicked problems. And what we try to do is we wanted to focus on intractable and wicked problems. And there's been no shortage of these in the Western Balkans, as you might imagine. So we've identified a number of these wicked problems. And one of these wicked problems is what we call political alienation. And this is a very complex problem, which probably we won't be able to solve. It's a problem that has multiple solutions. It's a problem which various stakeholders have different opinions about. It's a problem which has multiple ideas and perceptions about resolution. And we decided to tackle this here in Serbia first and then in the Western Balkans. So this comes to the part to why we are doing this work on youth immigration. Well, this is actually a part of a larger package. If you see us working and raising discourse on youth immigration, that means that we're also working in parallel with political parties. We have reached out to political parties in the region, especially Serbia, to talk to them how to communicate to young people. We have done polling in all the countries in the Western Balkans about youth alienation. We have seen parallels between young people leaving countries and young people not being politically active. And there's a very strong parallel in all the countries in the Western Balkans. This is a trend where people have not decided to engage in politics, where they haven't decided to be politically active. They are more prone to emigration. And as they emigrate, the creative capital of these countries is being lost. We started research last year in Serbia around this time, and we found out some staggering numbers that annually, just because of the cost of education for the people that are leaving, Serbia is losing about 1.2 billion euros. That means that all the money that the state is giving in providing education to students in high school, then students at universities, then students at PhDs, the moment a young Serbian citizen leaves the country, decides to immigrate, he takes about 35,000 euros in his bag with him the moment he leaves, because this is all money that the state investment. Then there's a secondary effect. These people are then not contributing to the economies of the country that they have left. Creative capital is lost. Now, these are the negative effects of migration. But there's also positive effects, mainly through remittances. But the problem with remittances is that when people give money back, most of it goes to general consumption. And only 3%, on the basis of our research, ends up in investments. So the money that is coming back in, the structure of the money that comes back in is not invested properly. So some of the recent research that we had, and I'm just going to lay out a few numbers, and tonight we have an exclusive for everybody. In the back, we have the research which was now completed also for North Macedonia, Albania, and Montenegro. We're doing another piece of research in Bosnia starting at the end of October. But we now have data for all 4 countries from the region. And I will mention this, so sort of combined costs that we have. And this is that Serbia, just on the basis of losing on education, loses about 1.2 billion annually. Albania loses about 500 million euros because of the people who are immigrating just on education costs. Macedonia is losing around 430 million, while Montenegro is losing about 78 million. Combined, this is about 2 billion per year that these 4 countries are losing only on education costs. Now, There's opportunity cost in terms of potential GDP per person. Here, combined, these countries lose about 1.8 billion. So in a nutshell, and this is what our data shows, is that the region, only these 4 countries from the Western Balkans, and we're going to add Bosnia soon, lose about 4 billion euros annually. This is money that is not retaining here. It's money that the state has invested in education, and it is potential GDP growth. In some countries, this is between 3 and 4% of GDP annually. And just for illustrative reasons, Serbia exports 1.1 billion euros in IT services annually, and it loses 1.2 in education costs. So all the exports per year are lost because of immigration. Similarly, in Macedonia, Macedonia exports all goods for about 400 million euros per month. This is the cost of education. So we lose 1 month in Macedonia as a country of exports because of these costs. I will also mention that Montenegro loses about 500 million. That's 1/3 of all income in tourism is lost because of youth immigration. So this is all data that I think should make people think. What we have tried to do with our research is we took a different approach. There's been quite a lot of discourse in the Western Balkans on reasons why people are leaving. There has been a lot of research on brain drain. There's been quite a lot of discussions. So this is not a new issue, and it's not a new phenomenon. There's been always been migrations from the Western Balkans, and there's always going to be. But we wanted to cost this, give this cost to policymakers, to institutions. I have to say we have an extremely positive case from Serbia coming, and I'm very happy that we have some people here from the government, some people here from the Serbian City Club, Serbian entrepreneurs. We've managed to sort of rally a small coalition of very able and willing people who want to address this issue. I think at the first time a country from the region has taken this step where it has included government institutions, economic chambers, and diaspora organizations to try to tackle this issue from a policy aspect. And the policy aspect is going to be very difficult, but I mean, the bottom line is people are going to leave. These countries cannot compete with the competitive pressure of the European Union, but what can be done is that on a policy level, countries can invest to decrease the number of people, and actually it's value for money. Investments in stopping immigration actually will bring more money in because people will stay and invest that in the country. So, thank you for allowing me for this slightly longer introduction, and I now want to introduce our fantastic panelists. We have with us Ms. Alida Vracic. She's the director of the think tank Populari. And she's a Europe Future Fellow, a Shimning Scholar, which I have to say because we are a British organization. And she's a researcher. She has quite a lot of experience in this area, and we're going to hear some thoughts from her. We have Dr. Pavel, and sorry if I don't pronounce this correctly, although I am from Macedonia, I should know Slavic. Pavel Kaczmarczuk. Close enough. Okay, thank you. And he's a professor at the Faculty of Economic Sciences at the University of Warsaw. And his main research interests include causes and consequences of international labor migration, migration and the labor market, migration policy. He comes from Poland, which, as you know, is a country that has had quite a lot of immigrants after it has joined the European Union. Generally, also, historically, there's been a lot of Poles in many other countries. So we welcome her views on the topic. We have Mr. Petar Grk, who's the Secretary General of the Bled Strategic Forum, if I'm correct. Petar has worked in various positions in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, involved in government. And we have Natasha Kocic. She's the director of the Serbia City Club. She has founded the Serbian City Club in 2007, along with 5 of her fellow colleagues in the UK. The Serbian City Club is a not-for-profit, apolitical organization established to promote the interests of Serbian professionals in the UK and Serbia. And the primary aim of the club is to provide a networking platform for various young professionals. And finally, we have Ivan Brkljac, who is now working together with the government, with a small group, with a small coalition. He's, correct me if I'm wrong, the director of the new, or about to become the head of the new
program, but later on.
Yes, the program which is going to be dealing with circular migrations. He has a BA International Business. He has founded a very successful startup business here in Mokrin House, and someone who has been talking for quite a long time about how to engage young people, a lot of businesses and young people, and bring investments back in Serbia. So, fantastic panel, great panel. I speak in snippets because that's one world leader does that, and apparently it's very effective. We have great people, we have excellent people with us today, and I hope we're going to have a very good and fruitful discussion. So I would like to sort of start off the discussion with Alida next to me, and I have some questions here which I need to find. And I want to ask you about your views about this topic. I mean, you've been researching quite a lot on immigration. I mean, what are your thoughts about this phenomenon and how we can tackle it in the Western Balkans?
Can you hear me? Yeah. As one of the great people on this great panel. It's a pleasure to be here. I've seen so many friends and colleagues from my previous life and engagements and work. And it's really, it's also quite spectacular because people that are sitting on this panel, we have been corresponding, but we have never met because there are only that many people dealing with this topic. I will give you a little overview of what I've done in the past couple of years. Basically, the question that we are discussing now is maybe now somewhat prominent, but it hasn't been like 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Very few people have even discussed it. And when I say very few, then I'm talking about civil society actors mostly, or international organizations, to some extent policymakers in the European Union, but certainly not people that are decision makers in our region. That basically sparked me to start digging a little bit further down and try to understand what is really happening and whether this is different from what we have seen in the 60s and why this phenomenon is actually a really interesting phenomenon. And this is where I've started, basically trying to crunch some numbers. I'm really happy that there are some numbers in place, that you have delivered some. I'm not as hopeful that numbers will change hearts and minds of people necessarily, because it's not only the cost, it's not only the 35,000 that they're taking along with them, it's the energy that is being lost. And I think this is a crucial aspect of the immigration issue. I was looking at specifically the reasons why people are leaving, and there were some myths around it, to be honest, because we all presume that people are leaving because of the economic opportunities that are not around. But my research has shown, and it has been repeated afterwards, that it's also other sets of reasons are contributing to the factor that we're seeing massive departures, and it's basically a feeling of impotence. People don't feel anymore that they can do lots. Their power and their will doesn't really count, and they've been going into this apathetic mode and basically deciding to leave. Part of it is also related to the fact that we are aspiring to become members of the European Union for pretty much the greatest chunk of our lives, which is 10, 20 years now. And we don't see much progress, and these are basically the trigger points for people to decide to leave. So that myth has been sort of dispelled to some extent, because it's not only the economic reasons, it's also political reasons. There's also pressure that they feel if they don't belong to a certain group or religious group or some social group. The second part of it is basically another myth is that the EU will fix the whole immigration point. We have seen from the Croatian example that I use quite a lot in my research, 2013, becoming a full-fledged member of the European Union, Croatia has seen massive departures. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people that are emigrating mostly to Germany, but also Ireland and some other places. So European Union as such, membership as such, an accession process will not bring that change. I was also looking at what's the difference between the immigration that we have seen before, because as you said, it's not a new phenomena. Gastarbeiters existed before, and I think everyone knows in the region what this was about. But the difference was that gastarbeiters were mostly first men, not well educated, and farmers coming from smaller places and somewhat urban areas. This immigration is very different because we're losing highly skilled people. We're using people with really specific, sophisticated skills that we could use very much back home. So that basically was my starting point. Once the benchmark was there and I understood more or less what I'm talking about, the point is what can be done. And to actually understand what can be done, you have to look comparatively at other experiences and other countries and a little bit beyond the region, because I don't think all the answers are back in the region. And this is why I went to Ireland, and I've done a study, basically trying to understand their model, discuss this with policymakers in Ireland, with civil society organizations, with people that emigrated, with those who returned, with those that are not willing to return. There was a whole spectrum of people that I discussed this matter with, and basically have come up with some conclusions that I presented in my paper, or one of the papers. And it boils down to the following. We have to be super realistic about what we want to achieve. So setting a realistic framework for what kind of immigration is happening in the region and what we want to achieve in possibly preventing people to leave, or making it possible for them to leave in circular migration, but also offering some attractive opportunities for them to anchor themselves back. And this realism comes from the fact that Ireland has been doing these policies for more than 30 years. It was decades and decades of really hard work and thinking through the issue, not necessarily trying to attract people back home, but open up so everyone can come in. Also, Ireland has done something that other countries didn't. They opened up also in the European processes. So they attracted also people that are people from Romania, people from Bulgaria, people from Poland. And they started bringing up businesses. Of course, it had a lot to do with the economic power that Ireland experienced at the time, but it was also very much about careful planning and careful policies that they have been building slowly in trying to communicate with the diaspora. And they understood that the small island of only 4 million people has 70 million strong diaspora. And that can become part of the global Irish. And this is how they coined it. So they've stopped referring to it as the diaspora, as emigrants. It has become part of global Irish. Now, putting that in our context means, and this is a very conservative assessment, and we can discuss how to make a better assessment, but there are at least 6 million people living abroad that come from this region. And we're talking about generations now. Now, 6 million people is a wealth. It's a human capital that certainly can serve, and it certainly can be mobilized one way or the other. The point here is that no one is trying really to reach out to these people. Governments at the moment are not trying to do that, and these people are quite frankly angry at the government. So the question is whether the government solely would be that one actor to communicate with diaspora, or it has to be a little bit more sophisticatedly sort of crafted agent that approaches to diaspora. They are in possession of pretty incredible skills. Like a couple days ago, I have discovered there is a person in Sarajevo who is working for more than 10, 15 years doing research on sharks. So a man sitting in Sarajevo doing research on sharks. Only a week ago, he presented his research in Washington, D.C. National Geographic invited him to come and basically present his research because it's so spectacular and it's so amazing, and everyone wanted to hear about this research. These people exist. They're all over the place, and we need to be careful in how to approach to them and what we actually ask them to do and what we want from them. Do we want to attract them back, or we want actually them to be exposed to all sorts of influences and to get even more skills and to basically do what they're doing, but still be available for the region one way or the other. Also, diaspora direct investments. You have never heard about diaspora direct investments. The entire region constantly speaks about foreign direct investments. So we need to attract foreign investors. They need to come, they need to invest, they need to build companies, and we need to start doing this and that. But you have never heard, I mean, it's not something that is a buzzword at all, diaspora direct investments. And diaspora direct investments are directly connected to those people that I'm talking about. So there are all sorts of tools in place that we could use Even using digital technology that is in place, because we're talking about immigrants that are digital. These people are not analog. They're emigrating also very digitally. They're getting to know other people who emigrated also digitally. Everything is available in a split of a second. So we have to change our way of thinking. We have to be careful how we're doing it. And we have to set ourselves for a long, long, long path that is going to be a decades-long path if we want to come up with a meaningful way to connect with diaspora. What I have found in Ireland is that they basically, they're well aware, for example, what Irish diaspora in America does, what are the interests, what are the problems, what are the issues, what they want to get from Ireland and what they want to return to Ireland. But they know very little, for example, about Irish diaspora in Emirates, or the Irish diaspora in I don't know, Asia or Central Africa. And this is where they invest. And they invest in a very strategic way by appointing very skilled people to go there, to talk to their diaspora, to ask them about all sorts of issues that they're having, sometimes to help them, sometimes to ask them for something. Philanthropy is a big thing. I mean, there have been cases that I have also put in some of my reports about philanthropists coercing governments into really, really cool and meaningful projects. There was a philanthropist originally from Ireland, but in the States, a multi-billion sort of entrepreneur, who basically coerced Irish government to open a department for research that has become one of the major schools for research, and coerced them in a way that he has offered them money, but only if they match this money. And they have stayed in the parliament for 2 days and 2 nights discussing this very issue, not being able actually to refuse this. So it has passed through. We have high wealth individuals in this region, but we don't necessarily see, apart from few examples like Novak Djokovic or some others that are actually investing into some education or investing into high level education, we don't see much of that. And I think it's really down to the point of us trying to do it via, really, really well thought through policies. So basically, it's my research is divided into two. One is what is happening and how we got here, but the other part is really towards solutions and what can be done. I think there's much more to learn from other experiences like Lithuania. Poland is really interesting because you have, everyone can be replaced because the Ukrainian influx, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are 2 million Ukrainians that arrived to Poland more or less that basically have replaced those that have left. In the Balkans, you don't see much of that because basically immigration is not even an issue. So there are lots of aspects that could be discussed.
Thank you, Alida. This is an excellent introduction into the topic, and because you mentioned Pavel and Poland, I'm now going to turn to him. Basically, Alida also started putting the question on my behalf. Poland has a lot of experience in migrations, especially after you became members of the EU. Can you tell us a little bit now about your perspective on this issue? 15 years down the road, how do you see this issue now as a EU member state, and also in relation to immigration coming to Poland? Please.
It would take some time, I guess. Many thanks for inviting me and having me on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here, first of all. And before I just answer the question, maybe a comment on myself, because yes, I'm economist by training, but I'm dealing with migration research for over 20 years now. And what's of some importance, I'm heading the Center of Migration Research at the University of Warsaw. And just to give you maybe a sort of context, at the center right now, we have over 50 researchers. In Poland, we have annual conferences of scholars dealing with migration. In last year, there was over 200 people there, attendance. So maybe just gives you some of the overview how it works in Poland, and that's quite important because migration studies are extremely difficult. The major difficulty is that the migration data is crap. So when we started in Poland, it was mid-1990s. In fact, it was just necessary to collect data on our own. Since then, we are working closely with Statistics Poland, so the Statistical Office of Poland. We are working with National Bank of Poland on collecting data. And I will just go back to this in a second, because I guess this is absolutely critical. If we just like to say something about migration, we just need to have some knowledge. And I have to admit that before coming here, I just tried to learn something about situation in Serbia in terms of migration. And I have to say that I failed to a large extent. So it's not that easy to find good, reliable data, not outdated data on migration from Serbia. So just maybe answer your question, but before, I like maybe to share with you some more universal issues related to migration, related to our discussion so far. And maybe 2 comments. I'm quite reluctant regarding the tax argument you used, but maybe we can just discuss it later. I really dislike this sort of approach when we just talk about migrants as a sort of lost population. That's not my favorite. I just comment on that later on. Then if we just speak about the Irish case, I would be really happy to discuss when it works and when it does not work, because I'm not sure that it's just a universal paradigm. We can just discuss it later. But if we just speak generally about migration, and if we just, for example, consider a country like Serbia, there are a few issues here. So first of all, I guess what we really need, we need to accept reality. And the reality is people are mobile. And people will be mobile. And there is no chance to control it. There is no chance to block it. Just forget about it. People will simply migrate. That's first. Second, what we really need to know, we just need to understand determinants of migration. And this is why we need data. I will just go back to this in a second. Then we can just try to limit incentives to migration. That's very difficult, but still we can do something. Again, I have some comments. Then we should do our best to utilize development potential of migration. You know, if people are leaving country, we should not treat it exclusively in terms of losses. It has some development potential. We can somehow try to utilize it. Again, I have some comments here. Then apparently, and it's super important, we need to build links to diaspora. And this is, I guess, what we'll discuss during the panel quite intensively. And last but not least, we need to work on well-prepared returns. Because people are moving back and forth. They are leaving, but they are also returning. And maybe I would just start from the very last point. You know, returns are tricky and returns are very difficult. And for many reasons. So first of all, it's not always clear what does it mean return. In case of Poland, quite a number of migrants, they are just mobile people. We really don't know if they returned or not. They are just mobile. So the question, how we should define return. Then, you know, there is quite common perception. People expect that there will be massive return flow. It rarely happens. People are just moving. It's quite difficult to disentangle it, for example, in statistical terms. So we should just try to follow it, but it's not that easy to do, really. And last but not least, you know, people are returning for many various reasons. So in the literature, we have, for example, returns of success and returns of failure. So I can just share with you that in Poland these days, we are discussing the issue if we really want to have a return migrants in Poland. That's not that fully clear, considering labor market situation and many, many, many other issues. And let me go back to determinants and to what we know. And unfortunately, correct me if I'm wrong, we do not know much about migration from Serbia. So first of all, the data I found, it's slightly outdated, I would say. So what we know, there's quite a massive process. It's just 5 to 7% of the population. This is what I found. And frankly, it's quite similar to the migration from Poland in the post-enlargement period. Just to give you maybe an overview, in 2003, the stock of Polish migrants abroad was about 1 million. Then just within 3 years, it increased to 2.7 million, more or less. And since then, the number is relatively stable, about 2.5 million. So this is the number of people who are just still citizens of Poland, but they are staying temporarily abroad. And if you just speak about diaspora, there is another controversial issue. You know, there are many people in Poland who just say that the Polish diaspora is about 20 million people. For me, it's just absurd. it's definitely less numerous. I would say maybe 5 or 6 million. Again, there's a huge controversies when we speak about diaspora. And when we go back now to Serbia, so the process, and that was striking for me, is highly differentiated. And it's highly differentiated regionally. This is, I guess, for you, what you know now, but it brings substantial risks. For example, if we speak about demographic outcomes, that's something absolutely need to be tackled. And it's also differentiated by skill level. I guess we'll still have a chance to discuss the migration of highly skilled later, but in case of Serbia, what is really striking is that we have overrepresentation of migrants of two extremes of the skill composition. So we have overrepresentation of highly skilled and also low-skilled migrants. And again, that's super interesting. And now, first of all, if we learn something about migration, then the question is how we could at least limit the outflow. And again, that's a super difficult issue because I guess, there's a general rule. We should impose good overall economic and social policies. So that's very simple and very difficult. But I do not know better rule. For example, if you just look at countries like Poland, like Slovakia, and other countries of Central and Eastern Europe, what they are doing, they are just imposing overall, general socio-economic policies. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. I guess I can just stop now, and I will be happy then to... okay, I didn't answer your question.
But you know what? I want to ask you a follow-up question because you said, how do you define returns?
Sorry, sir?
How do you define returns when people come back? I mean, do you define somebody who's 2 months out of 12 months back in the country as a returnee? I mean, at one point, do we call people coming in or contributing a returnee,
It depends what you want to know. Really, I'm not joking. It depends what you want to know. For example, if you're just interested in labor market support, I guess 2 months stay is enough.
Okay.
So, but it's not that easy. No, in case of every single research, it would be necessary to define migrants. And I can tell you why it's so important. I guess Serbia is in quite similar position, but in case of Poland, we are talking about mobility within free migration regime. And for some time now, we call it fluid or liquid migration. Some British scholars started to call it at some point intentional unpredictability. So it says that people are moving, they are staying abroad, but all the time, they are just watching, they are controlling situation both in Poland and abroad. And they are just ready to change the plans. And I can tell you one thing, we really need to have very good information to monitor the process. For example, National Bank of Poland, since 2006 or 7, every 2 years, they are doing a large-scale survey in 4 countries. So those countries, the United Kingdom, Ireland, the Netherlands, and Germany. Right now, also Norway. So every 2 years, they are doing surveys on large samples, and they are just trying to find data on Polish migrants. So, for example, from this data, we know that since some point, Polish temporary migrants became settled migrants. But otherwise, it's really difficult to learn it. Yeah, so another issue, and I guess it's still lacking in case of Serbia, for example, if you refer to labor force survey, then you can somehow indicate both emigrants and return migrants. But again, it depends, for example, of structure of the survey. I guess it's not part of the survey here in Serbia. Yeah, it's household survey, but the question is how massive is the part of questionnaire devoted to migration? Exactly. In Poland, it is. So maybe I will comment briefly on that. I'm also here to learn you and also to help. So we are really ready to help and so to assist. We gather massive experience also in terms of data on migration. So
excellent. That's good to hear, because we are also very interested in the issue, and we'll be supporting various activities to support now this initiative, this alliance, which wants to tackle the migration issue. And one of the members of that alliance is Natasha Kościc. She's from the Serbia City Club. And my question to her is, Natasha, the Serbia City Club has some ideas how to address this issue in Serbia. You are bringing personal experiences and perspectives. You've also learned from some existing practices, such as the Irish model. Can you tell us your views about how to potentially tackle this issue?
Yes, and thank you very much for having me and my colleagues sharing our information and experience with you. And just to kind of state the fact, I am a migrant or immigrant, probably one of the ones that will never come back, though I keep changing my mind every few months. But that kind of links to what you were talking about, Pavel, as well, in terms of what does it mean to come back. And this is something that we are dealing with all the time. Somebody who returns to Serbia or some other country could be somebody who comes for 2 months, somebody who comes for short term. That doesn't mean you're taking an anchor from whatever country you're living in at the moment and returning to the place of what you call home and living there. But what I also want to talk about is about how we who live abroad view the immigration and the issue of how it's being dealt with in Serbia or region in particular. So as it's been mentioned already a few times, immigration isn't a new phenomenon at all, and not just new phenomenon for the Balkans in the region, but actually across the world. People are migrating all the time, and that happens in Western Europe as well. The difference is that in Western Europe, people go back home, and in our part of the world currently, it seems to be going only in one direction. So we were quite keen to and excited to have heard when some analysis was done, and I have to be honest, I was quite alarmed that we're talking about the cost of people who are leaving. It's quite a burden for young people who are living in Serbia now to have price tags next to them. Oh, if I'm just in high school, I cost this much. If I'm in university, this much. But if I go to medical universities, this much. So it's really not fair, because straight away you're putting people in boxes where they don't necessarily belong. So that's one thing that I think we shouldn't really be talking about, or it seems like the wrong premise. And I know, Emil, you mentioned that, there is revenue and maybe it's not kind of registered in the right way, and it doesn't go or gets invested in the same way as it should be if people have stayed here. But actually it is a huge amount of money, and when it comes to Serbia, it's a significant percentage of the GDP. And sometimes it feels, well, maybe they don't mind people going abroad because they are sending money back at regular intervals. So it's money that you can really, really count on. But migration can have extremely positive influences as well. And Serbia, about 100 years ago, actually started sending people abroad to gain experience and skills that they couldn't get in their country. And that's nothing wrong with this. This is quite actually exciting. But I think the issue is not about the people are going, and you're right, Pavel, as well, about we don't know the determinants, but actually one of the things in Serbia in particular that we are facing with is the challenges that people face when they want to come back, or when they start talking to their families about coming back. So talking to family, it's like, but you left us. So you have this stigma attached to you that you actually left everyone behind you. How dare you leave me behind here? And we went through struggles and all the rest of it, and you were enjoying yourself wherever you were, not understanding how lonely it can be to live abroad when you first get there. Then you get judged by your colleagues or potential colleagues. Oh, so you lived abroad, you think you're better than me? So you are facing another stigma. Oh gosh, I have to now prove myself, that no, I'm not that type of a person. All I want to do is come back and share the skills that I've gained and learned, and actually maybe learn something from this environment as well. And then you face the challenges that society puts on you, because I've been, up until recently, we had a huge issue about diploma recognition, and people who have finished their universities abroad couldn't get that recognized. And I think it's still an issue for people with qualified professional qualifications. So if people want to come back, the governments really have to make it, or they have to enable it for them to come back. And that means having conversations at various and different levels. It's not just about number crunching, and whether one of the ministers we met a few years ago told me, well, not all 4 you can't tell me that all 4 million of you wants to come back. And it was quite staggering conversation to have when you're coming back to Serbia and trying to help and see how to find ways to enable the channels of communication that didn't exist that we have now. But we were quite excited that last year we had an opportunity to speak to the Prime Minister and share the idea of circular migration and what that could mean for Serbia. And again, that wasn't a new idea. We didn't invent the wheel in a way. We spoke to a number of different organizations and in particular spoke to colleagues in Ireland as well. We all seem to be going in the Dublin direction, but they have got some amazing experience and some very good practices that we thought we could use that could help us. And one of the reasons why we wanted to talk to the Prime Minister, first of all, she was very receptive, which is very different to what we have been experiencing for the last 15 years that we have been working, and not just on this issue, but just in general, helping people who are either coming to the UK or trying to return back to Serbia. And just to make a point, we have actually helped about 500 people come back to Serbia, either directly or indirectly. And there are quite a few more that would like to come back, but they're always asking us, what is the kind of situation in Serbia? What can you tell us? And the reason they're asking us is because they trust us. They don't trust governments. And the reason they don't trust governments is because somebody has already mentioned that there is no communication. Usually you'll come to the embassy, somebody will come to talk to us about how much money can you give us so that Serbia, Bosnia, North Macedonia, whatever can prosper. That's not the kind of conversation that you want to hear when you go in to speak to people. What you want to hear is how can we cooperate, coordinate. You know, we would be willing to give them money. That's not an issue, but sometimes you feel like you are a wallet and not a person that might have some ideas that could bridge those gaps that are currently existing. So we thought that it would be a really good combination once we found that kind of channel of communication with the Prime Minister to start building that trust in a different direction with the diaspora as well. And our message as well has always been it has to be done in conjunction with diaspora. It can't be done to diaspora because otherwise it's not going to work. If we don't have a two-way communication, then nothing is going to be, you know, it's not going to result in a long-term project. It's not going to be sustainable. And that's what you want. This isn't about you know, having conversation, and it's really interesting to hear that and see that Serbia, and at this forum as well, we're discussing at such a level because it is quite alarming, not just in terms of the numbers of people that are going and the talent that's going, but actually that we're not doing anything to retain it and to open the door for those people to come back. And I just wanted to add a couple of other things that we from the Serbian diaspora abroad are kind of viewing it as the things that could be helpful. One is the way we engaged about the voting, and it's been really difficult. We have the right, unlike in the UK where I live, if I've moved, because I'm now British as well, after 10 years I would have lost my right to vote. In Serbia I still have that right, but actually being able to vote is the most difficult and excruciating thing you can imagine, unless you live in London like I do. But if you live in America, somewhere in the middle of Ohio or Iowa or some other state, it could cost you $1,000 just to go and cast your vote that you actually have the right to. And then the voices that you hear from Serbia, well, why should you vote? You don't live here anymore. So it's kind of difficult to exercise the right that you have and have those discussions when you're not being even listened to. The other one is the language itself. We are speaking a specific language that's dying out. And it's dying out because we're not teaching it in the right way. We have new generations that are being born in other member states and other countries rather, to mixed marriage couples. Not every couple in the family is purely Serbian. So it's not possible to potentially maintain the language. And if we don't do anything about it, it's not just going to be the numbers of people that are not going to come back. We are going to start losing our identities. And in about 3 or 4 generations' time, it could be even more kind of emergency prone for us to talk about what are we doing. And third, and the most important for us, and this is what we're talking about and why we're here and why Ivan is here as well, is that agency or foundation, how we want to call it, for the circular migration, work hopefully together with the government, but also members of civil society and other organizations. We are going to be able to have that opportunity to very openly discuss some of very, very difficult subjects that we, diaspora people or people who live abroad, don't necessarily have the platform to talk to and have our voices heard. And just to remind you all, we used to have Ministry or Department for Diaspora. It's disappeared. It's now an office somewhere in the Department of Foreign Affairs. It doesn't, again, it comes back to that point that I was making earlier. It doesn't entrust in us that the country is actually serious about listening to us or wanting to engage with us. So my message would be, we are willing to talk, but we need to know who we need to talk to. And if we are going to have that conversation, it has to be for very, very long term.
Natasha, you mentioned that you're now also a British citizen. You might return, you might not return. Right next to you is Ivan, who has returned and is here, has developed a very successful business, is now part of a team that plans to work on addressing this issue. So I want to hear maybe from Ivan to sort of talk about, you came back. You probably know a lot of people that are abroad. I know you have some interesting views about how to best network. And I think what has been the common theme with Alida and Pavel and Natasha is that they all spoke about the importance of making the link to the diaspora. So I'm keen to hear about your ideas about making this link with the diaspora.
First of all, thank you for the invitation, because this will be officially the first time I'm publicly speaking about my new role, since I feel a little bit kind of, there's several sides of me here that I want to express, because on a personal level, I am somebody who's lived for 9 years abroad and then decided to come back. And I think this is important to say that I decided I wasn't forced to, it wasn't a failure return, as you were mentioning, Pavel, but it was a conscious choice, because I believe I belong to this cultural context and I wanted to feel part of this. And I know Serbia is not necessarily the best country in the world, but if it can be better, if I can help along with it, that was my particular reasons why I decided to come back. And to connect to it, what I think everybody before me was speaking about, there is a lack of trust. There is a lack of link. There is a lack of the diaspora. And I know this from first-hand experience. You don't know what to expect when you're coming back. You don't know who to talk to. And in some aspects, I think the timing is perfect. And in some aspects, I think we are falling behind. So as you mentioned, in Poland, you have started talking about this and doing statistics in the 90s. We are just now starting to come up with the data. And you're right when you're talking about that when you try to explore some data, it's almost impossible to find relevant data because it doesn't really exist. There's one example where all of us who have at one point lived abroad, none of us have declared ourselves that we left the country. We are still officially in the country. We're registered here, and the government does not see. We're invisible for the government that we're away. And so we are lagging behind countries that have already, like, for 30 years done this project, like Ireland did, like Israel is doing. But in one other aspect, I think it is the perfect timing, because in this short time that I've been talking both with the government, with other partners, with diaspora clubs, with other institutions, there is an absolute support in first of all, recognizing that this is a big problem. Now, whether we talk about the numbers or whether we talk about the general effect, there is a general understanding that this is a big problem. And there's a general consensus that something should be done. With that being said, it is in a way a perfect timing to create an organization that will be solely dedicated to communicating with our diaspora. One particular example connecting to the ministry, this is something that I also recently found out, and it's been a case in other countries as well. The problem with a body like the Ministry for Diaspora, it is too slow to react. That it is, as an institution, doesn't have enough, tools to quickly adapt. This is why this organization that is going to be formed within the next 3 months is going to be an organization that is going to be speaking directly to the needs of the diaspora. And we're going to divide it in several different parts, because we do understand that the migrations are fluid. We do not expect everybody to come back. However, we want to help those who want to come back to understand if they want to come work, how is that done? Where do you look for the exact information? Some people who have been abroad for 20 years, they might not even know where to look. That's where the body is going to exist, so that we know where to direct them to. Also, some people that are, for example, second generation, want to come and study, maybe do a PhD here. We want to have a body that's going to be directing, saying, okay, these are the universities, this is how well they're listed on different, this is how well they're ranked. Another example, if you want to come and invest, these are the startups that are, and we will be the one who are saying, okay, these are the startups to look into, contact these organizations because they have legitimacy when it comes to startup ecosystems in Serbia. Or these are the investment funds that have been investing in the previous years successfully in the market. Also, something that we're not only, and this is very important, that developing that trust is now essential. This is why I hope I'm telling transparently to everybody, I'm really willing to, I'm coming in this from the private sector purely for value reasons. I'm somebody who returned and want to see this be moving forward. This is a personal objective of mine. With that being said, how to frame this correctly? With this being said, I really want to create a team and a coalition, as you called it, Emil, where everybody is on board of doing this the proper way, transparent way. And when it comes to developing trust, this is what I wanted to say, that we are not going to be out on the lookout for the money. We're not going to be the wallet seekers. What we want to find exactly is, if you want to come back, for example, do you not want to come back to work? You want to contribute to the country you feel some belongings to. We're going to create programs especially for second generation or third generation Serbians who want to come back and see, maybe volunteer, contribute their time, their efforts. But money is not going to be the primary thing we're going to be looking for, but establishing connections both towards the diaspora and then between diaspora as well. So these are some of the things. And I know a lot of people who live abroad still, and I think many of them have similar feelings like you, Natasha, that they don't know if they want to come back or not. It's always an open question. And even when they're certain the most, there's always a glimpse of hope in one side that something's going to change. I think, and when we talk about this brain drain problem, I think our role in the next 10 years, and it is a long process, is to create an ecosystem in which the diaspora people are going to be even more optimistic about that window of opportunity. So I think we can consider this, if we do this right in the next 10 years, this will not be the brain drain. This will be something that I've heard someone say, brain deposit. Because in 10 years, if we create something valuable here, in a good ecosystem, people will come back. Not all of them, but people will come back. And then we have something to work with. And then it's not about numbers, it's going to be about the people that come back, but they will bring the numbers up as well. So I think that's the way I'm looking at it anyways.
Thank you, Ivan. And we're going to conclude our first round of questions and sort of interventions with Peter. Peter, you come from Slovenia. You're probably aware of the efforts that Slovenia is making recently to attract various categories of individuals and people and categories of people with various educational backgrounds to come to Slovenia. Also, you have the experience of being member of the EU and people also leaving and migrating in the rest of the European Union. What are your thoughts and perspectives on this issue?
Thank you very much. It's nice to be the last on the panel because you can just repeat what everybody else said and look smart, you know. So a lot was said, a lot of good points. Maybe what I can contribute to this debate is a little bit more political view and less analytical. I mean, we talked about building necessary economic and social reforms in order for manage better the migration flows, because as we said, migration flows have been in the past and they're going to be also in the future. Why it can be done in Ireland, why it can be done in, let's say, Slovenia? I mean, the recent polls in, I think they were done by Regional Cooperation Council, and they were done for, you know, the 6 members of the Western Balkans and also, I think, Croatia and Slovenia. And it showed that basically in Slovenia you have 67% of young people who don't want to leave. When they were asked, would you like to leave Slovenia? In the Western Balkans you have quite the opposite. You have, I think, the average number is 80% of the young people. I think in Albania it's 90 or 90. So everybody wants to leave. So what's the difference? I mean, how do you break this vicious circle? Because we talked about the vicious circle. We know more or less, I mean, we don't know, but more or less it's apparent what are the problems. Corruption, lack of hope, unemployment. You have 35% of unemployment of young people in the Western Balkans, 35. The average in European Union is, I think, 13 or 12. So basically this disparity is huge. So we know what are the problems of this vicious circle. Now, why doesn't it change? And, you know, my contribution to this debate would be that there is no pressure. There is no pressure on the political elites, on the governments, to do the right thing. Because, you know, I mean, Western Balkans went through a lot of very, very bad things in the past. And one of the things that kind of gave hope, where young people are still sold, not entirely, but they are still believing in, is European Union, is the enlargement. And if you take this away, then, you know, they're left with nothing. And in this sense, what I'm missing in the Western Balkans is this positive pressure from two sides. And they are part of the same vicious circle. One is the pressure from the European Union through the enlargement process, which is not going anywhere, and it's not giving hope, and it's not pressuring the governments of the Western Balkans to do more in terms of young people, in terms of socio-economic reforms that they need to do. And also lack of pressure from the young people from the region. Because, again, I mean, I don't necessarily believe in data, but I found some interesting numbers. 42% of young people in the Western Balkans said they don't care about politics. They simply don't care because they already have a train ticket or a flight ticket to somewhere else. So, you know, the governments, it's not just the Western Balkans, I mean, it's everywhere. They need some positive pressure in order to make a good decision, a positive decision, an active decision. And right now, what we are facing with in the Western Balkans is that the governments are not being positively pressured in order to move from the point that they are right now standing in. So this is how I wanted to link also, you know, the debate that we are having with the debate which is probably happening on the other panel, that motivation of enlargement, also in terms of migration, you know, shouldn't be underestimated. And I think we are making, as a European Union, a strategic mistake in not offering hope and passion to the young people to put pressure also on the political elites in order to move and to make the right decisions in terms of fighting all the things and making the reforms which are necessary, not for the European Union, but for the countries themselves. Thanks.
Thank you, Petar. I think we have time for a quick round of another 2-minute interventions, and then we can open the floor a little bit for additional questions. I just want to quickly head off to Alida and say, can positive advantages of migrations match the negative ones in the Western Balkan context?
I will answer your question, but let me first reflect on what I've heard so far. So there is a common thread. We all think that diaspora should be basically, we should reach out to diaspora and we should do something about it because we see it as a potential. I would only second the efforts of Serbia going that direction, but I think we have to have a somewhat more holistical view of what is happening. So it's not only emigration that is happening, it's also depopulation that is happening. These two are really, really tightly connected. In only a few decades, by 2030, it's going to be significantly less people in this region. And not necessarily because of the immigration, but because of low fertility rates. Because we are basically dying out. This is not only for the Western Balkans, this is the entire Europe, but it really matters for the region given how small these countries are and how difficult it is to replace someone with someone else. So that's the first starting point. Second point is if we are going to start thinking about agency for the circular migration, it cannot be only one entity that is dealing with the issue. It needs to be Chamber of Commerce. It needs to be, businesses that are interested in this topic. It needs to be civil society that does research. We're talking about hundreds, I mean, I have no idea how many, but like so many studies have been produced in the last 40 years in Ireland only, trying to understand its diaspora, trying to understand what immigrants are doing and how they feel in Australia, how they do what they're doing and what are their preoccupations in America, what they're doing in Emirates, what they're doing in Asia, trying to reach out to them, trying to understand their potential of returning, but not only really like what are their capabilities, what they're good at, what are the networks, what we're talking about here. This has not even begun. We don't have a single institute that does only this. I mean, with some small steps we started, but we really need to think about it as a more general issue. We need to start connecting with people at universities. This is the point where we start connecting with them, because this is where they start thinking about leaving with those 35,000 in their pockets. To connect with them means, that we know a certain person who is good at something and something. He or she is in the first year of university, and she's thinking about leaving. Having known who this person is and building a database is the key that we're going to pull afterwards in 5, 10, 20 years. All this has to be an ecosystem that we have discussed. I think it's really more of a general commitment by a certain entity, by a certain, in this case, by the state or by the states in the region, that they are serious about this issue and to involve every single one into this matter from bottom up or whatever, top down. And this is, I think, the only sort of way to also communicate with diaspora that we're serious about this.
Thank you. Pavel, I won't ask you a question because you won't answer it. So I will just give you 2 minutes to make a reflection on all of these comments and actually say what you want to say.
That's
Please.
perfect solution. Thank you. Maybe I like to comment on two issues. And the first one, it's related to a question, surprisingly. And it's about benefits of migration, because often, when we speak about migration, we focus too much on costs. And I would just like to quote Michael Clemens, who once wrote that migration is what we make it, really. So it has both advantages and disadvantages. And we just speak about emigration, and I could just, right now I can just somehow refer us to the case of Poland. I'm rather optimistic, for example, when I just speak about the post-enlargement migration, really massive and really difficult, particularly in many Polish regions, but still they are positives. And the first one, I'm always emphasizing, is just that people, they are simply exercising their freedom of choice. And that's, for me, that's absolutely critical. They just move because they can. And this is what really should appreciate first. And the second point, we often focus too much on remittances, financial remittances only. However, okay, it's important. In case of Serbia, I just read a super interesting paper showing that remittance in Serbia, it has some effect on poverty alleviation. That's important. But apart from that, we have also so-called social remittances. So migrants, even not only return migrants, but genuine migrants, they are bringing new habits, new ways of behavior, new skills, for example, language skills. That's really important. For example, in countries like Poland, I guess Slovenia is also the case. You know, if you just talk to young people, they are Europeans. They think like Europeans, they behave like Europeans. Why? Because many of them just visited European Union countries. This is what we should definitely take into consideration. And if I can, maybe one comment or two or three comments on skilled workers, because I guess this is somehow subject of our discussion here. And it's always very tricky, because now this is a point that is in the forefront of the discussion on migration often, but the problem is that first of all, we don't know much who are we talking about. Who are skilled migrants? They are not only specialists, they are, for example, tertiary skilled people. And in modern societies, they may up to, I don't know, 40% of the population. So it's not very strange that people who are well skilled, they are migrating. You know, our populations are simply better and better skilled. Second, if we just consider motives and underlying factors, we need to consider that they are not the same as in case of regular, ordinary, let's say, migrants. Why? You know, skilled migrants, apparently salaries are important. Quality of life is important, but many of them, they move because of the need for, I don't know, professional advancement. They would like to have access to better equipment, better research teams. So this is why we will definitely have skilled migration. And now again, going back to Serbia. Again, I'm not specialist, but I can just share with you some thoughts on that. I just read something that it's striking and very dangerous, and it's about super low efficiency of transition between higher education and labor market. And this is probably what you know. And the outcome of the study I read that it's only 13% of people whose skills are properly matched on the labor market. When we just start from the cohort that starts their study and ends in a proper labor market position, 13%. You know, if you just talk about skilled migrants, in my opinion, it's all about mismatches. They are severe mismatches. And this is exactly what we observed in Poland before 2004. If I just could give you one simple reason why in Poland migration in post-2004 period was so massive, that would be this one. You know, educational boom in 1990s, larger and larger cohorts of graduates, and labor market that was not prepared for just absorbing this labor force. And this is exactly, I guess, what you observe right now in Serbia. And this is super dangerous. And again, and this is my very last point, there is no silver bullet here, unfortunately. But we know more or less what to do. So first of all, we need to work on quality of education. Education that should match better labor market needs. That's obvious. Then we should somehow work on the transition between higher education and labor market. I guess involvement of the business here is critical. It's absolutely critical. Then there is a question of labor market support and lifelong education. Again, this is what we know. And last but not least, this support for entrepreneurs. In case of many transition economies, entrepreneurship is sort of really relief if we just speak about these difficulties on the labor market. Just consider none of these factors relates directly to migration. It's all about labor market related policies. And this is one of the paradoxes of migration. Often when we speak about migration and migration policies, they have nothing to do with migration. Okay, I'll stop now.
Thank you very much, Pavel. And it's better that I didn't ask you the question, and you said this. Natasha, you are very well connected in London, in the UK. How connected do you feel you are in Serbia, and which elements of society are you most connected? That's the question, and then any general comments you want to make.
Well, considering that the Serbian City Club has been quite active in Serbia for the last 15 years, I have to say I feel very connected. And it was, this evening's event was a case in question. I arrived and I couldn't even go and get a glass of water because everyone was coming and saying, hello, I haven't seen you, I'll work with you on this and the other, which was really good, and the same in the UK. But I have that because of the Serbian City Club. So I'm one of 6 people that have that really good opportunity and a privilege. Not everyone has that. Not every door is open for everyone. It took us a very long time to get to where we are now. But we gained that trust from the Serbian institutions as well. And it takes a very long time, and it's mutual. And it's interesting, tonight we're all concentrating on diaspora. What to me also lacks is, what about Serbia? So yes, people have gone, and there's nothing we can do about people leaving. And Pavel, you've just mentioned something that reminded me that of the things we were talking about, data and the lack of data. We don't actually know what labor market in Serbia needs. What are the kind of actual jobs that are missing? What criteria is there? And then we hear these big companies are trying to get some foreigners to come and work in the UK, in Serbia, and open the opportunities for them. And then we ask, well, what about us who live abroad? We will probably be cheaper, and it's not even about the money. People coming back don't come back because they think they're going to make a lot of money, as you know, even as well. It's about you have connections here and you want to contribute as well. So we really need to know what's missing in order to help, and not create that gap between, oh, now you're going to give all these opportunities to people who are living abroad, but what about people who are staying here? And one of the things that really bugs me when we're talking about brain drain in Serbian, it sounds horrific. It means that everyone else who stayed behind doesn't have a brain. And it's awful. It's not true. We have really talented people who are here who have never left, and they don't have to leave. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a brain with it just because they haven't left. And unfortunately, we had what we had in the last 30 years in the Balkans. And it has created a type of environment where young people think the grass is greener on the other side. And I just have to go and see it. And actually, when people ask us, in Serbia in particular, well, should people go? We say, absolutely. Everyone should go for at least 6 months. And once they see that there isn't a mummy to cook for them and wash for them, and they actually have to work, it's a different life. But that doesn't mean it's going to be a bad life or a better life. It's a different experience, which everyone should really get to experience if at all possible. It puts things into perspective. It makes you think differently about the world, which could hopefully help your career in one way or the other. And if you manage to finish university or gain some kind of work experience abroad as well, even better. But that doesn't mean it is going to be better just because you left somewhere. And another thing we were talking about, and I did make the comment about, people returning. Not everyone wants to come back necessarily, not at this time. And I've now lived in London for 27 years, and this is why I have these internal things. Shall I go? Shall I not go? We all have that, and it doesn't matter whether I return or not. But to me, being on a panel tonight is one way of returning, one way of sharing my experiences, my thoughts. And people might be interested, they may not be interested, that doesn't matter, but the conversation is going, and that's important, that we are being asked. And the same in London. We have made some extremely good connections with the British Parliament and people in kind of certain organizations where we want them to hear what we have to say. And we have to be very realistic. We don't think that by forming this organization, all the problems will be resolved. They won't be. We're probably going to uncover a million other things that we have to do, but that's fine. That means that at least we're doing something about it. Hopefully we'll start getting, data might not always be right, but at least it will point us in the right direction. Finally, we may actually know how many Serbians live abroad, because we don't know. In the UK, we don't know. We just all say a number because it's convenient. But also we have different generations who live there who don't think the same way. So what we are doing with one group potentially, and we have kind of concentrated on the skill side, but we have a lot of unskilled people who may not be interested or willing to even talk to us at this level, which is fine as well. So we might be able to find something else for them. But to me, and at least for us from the club, what has been very important that the signal has changed and the channel of communication is there. And you might think I keep banging about it all the time, but it's very important. Somebody's listening. And it's different when you feel you're talking to a brick wall or nobody, or where you have a person who actually is maybe not completely interested in everything you want to say, but is listening. And that is the first step that I think we needed to make.
Thank you, Natasha. I will now give 2 minutes to Petar because because he doesn't want to be the last, and I'll leave Ivan the last. So I want to ask Petar, you spoke about positive pressure. There's been a couple of comments about matching labor needs with the educational system here. Has Slovenia been more successful on this issue? Do you think that's also one of the reasons why so many young people are not leaving, because they are matched to do well in Slovenia?
And this is something that also Pavel mentioned. I mean, educational systems. If you look at the last PISA tests, which were done for the region and for other countries, you will see the big disparities, and you will see that the quality of educational system in the countries of the Western Balkans is actually getting worse and worse, which is bad, of course. On the other hand, when we talked about the mobility, yes, it has positive effects, or it has positive narrative also, but we have to talk about the mobility in a sense when people want to live and not when the people need to live. There's a difference. Mm-hmm. So you need to provide an environment where people live because they can, because they want, and not because they need to. We were talking inside of the European Union regarding, with some countries, regarding mobility and migration from the Western Balkans and how to kind of reverse the trends. One thing which stood out was there is a lot of young people going out from the Western Balkans to study, which is a good thing. This is what we said. You have to look to other countries and then come back. The problem is that these people who go out and study, they never come back. Mm-hmm. They study in the European Union countries and they stay there, or they move to US, or they move to, but not back to the countries of the origin. So in this sense, I know that you have a lot of different methods how to do that, but one would be that you have scholarships which you give to these young people to go study abroad, with the clause that they have to come back and work somewhere. Mm-hmm. Be it for the government, or you can do it also through the private sector, that you give scholarship where you need to come back and work for 2-3 years in order to give back something to the provider of the scholarship. So you have methods, you have everything, but as I said, these are I wouldn't say small things, and what Ivan is doing and everybody else is perfect, but I think at the end of the day you have to look at the big picture and the whole region, and how the region stacks up and how it's going to do the necessary reforms. And here again I'm talking about the political elites and the positive pressure which needs to be applied.
And before I hand out to Ivan, one very short comment from Arida.
Just a very short comment. I think this is precisely what does not work, Peter. You cannot coerce people, young people that are really smart and super intelligent, to go somewhere with an option to return and pay back for what they have done and what they have done. I mean, it doesn't work with foreign scholarships, with Chilean scholarships, Fulbrights. We had that for more than 20 years in the region. it's not going to work that way. I think we have to be much more clever about how to attract them. I mean, Slovenia is one good example that survives based on the fact that it attracts immigrants from Bosnia. Your labor force is actually coming from the region. Otherwise, we would be talking about Slovenia in a very, very different manner, right? It's a relatively small country, and whoever leaves actually does leave an impact. This is something that doesn't happen in the rest of the region because you have no immigration. You have thousands of immigrants that are stranded somewhere from Syria, Afghanistan, and other countries, but there are no policies in place that are thinking about potentially involving them somehow, getting them into the labor market. And there is no attraction also from the other countries. And this is why I keep on saying that this has to be a much more general issue. It really has to capture every single tissue of the society. If we're thinking about diaspora, if we're thinking about emigration, let's open up this debate. Let's admit that we have a problem. Let's admit that this problem is not the only problem. Let's also look at the other examples, what's going on, and who can basically learn from whom. And let's also discuss where are the central points. And we know that people are emigrating to Germany, that they're going to Ireland, they're going to Austria, or they're going to Slovenia, and some other places in North America. Let's strengthen our capacities in those countries. You know, this is diplomatic network that we have. Why not using it? There is an infrastructure in the region, and infrastructure is based basically in the ministries of diaspora. Maybe it doesn't work anymore, or it's being converted into something else in Serbia. But it certainly exists in the rest of the region. There are structures being in place. There are people being paid to do what they're supposed to be doing, but this is not happening. And this is why I think we have to move more horizontally and vertically in this matter, and think about it as a, you know, as a top issue really to discuss. Sorry for this intervention.
Thank you, Alida. And finally, Ivan, where do you see your project 3 to 6 months from now?
I'll try to be brief because I know we're not on time, but and Peter, you're right, it's being last. I'd just like to thank Alida for mentioning something before in the previous moment when she was speaking. She was saying how important it is to involve everybody, and this also connects to your question about where I think we'll be in 3 to 6 months. You were mentioning, Alida, how it's important to have to include so many different partners, and what I can tell you from that in the past month we have been talking with the Chamber of Commerce of Serbia, with the Fund for Young Talents, with the Fund for Science, with different diaspora clubs. For example, we just have a set of meetings that are happening next week with Serbian City Club, for example. We have been talking with the government institution, ministries, embassies, with UNDP, with WFD, with everybody who is interested into stepping into this arena. And when I said in my first, when I was first speaking, that it is the perfect timing, it is the perfect timing because all these potential partners are trying to say, yes, we want to be partners. That is why I think maybe we're lagging in years, but now it is the perfect situation to start this and I think this also connects to what Natasha was saying, is what we want to establish in the next few months. Maybe we're not going to be able to get everything rolling, but we're going to be listening and trying. In the beginning, we're going to be trying case by case to figure out where the bottlenecks of the systems are. When we figure that out, we're going to try to fix it from the top level on the system level. And then we're going to continue on doing case by case and system definition. And what you were saying about, there is actually a system of the Fund for Young Talents has a system where you have a scholarship and then afterwards you have to return to the country. Well, have to. You don't have to, but if you don't return to the country, you can pay the scholarship back. So there is a system of incentives to go out, and there is everything, and I think it is really important not to prevent people from going, as you were saying. That is not the idea, but to create the ecosystem in such way that people want to come back for whatever reason that is, for their personal reasons. They want to come back, and this is what we need to be working towards, and that is hopefully we'll be setting the foundations of that. And this is, as we all understand, this is not a 1 year, 2 year, 5 year project. This is a 10, 20 plus year project, but in the next 6 months, we'll be setting the foundations of that, and we want to set it up transparent, talking to many partners, trying to figure out. We have already started talking with other countries who have similar programs. Armenia, with Israel, we plan to visit Ireland. We are really planning to basically copy all the best examples that other people have tried. Try not to fall in the pitfalls that they have fallen in. Trying to listen to everybody who wants to speak to us. We might not be able to push it down the line every single time, but we will listen to every single person who wants to talk to us. So that is what we're going to be doing in the next 6 months.
Thank you, Ivan. I feel the need that I should open the floor for some questions because I think there's some interest around the topic. So if there's anybody who's interested, please, sir, can you please just give us your name and where you come from?
Thanks. Thank you. My name is Brian Ebel. I'm from the Embassy of Canada. Canada has grown to be a big and prosperous country in part because of the contribution of so many skilled and talented and hardworking immigrants. Traditionally, in the recent years, we've accepted 300,000 immigrants per year. We've looked at the impact that this has had on our labor markets, our social composition, our cohesion as a country, and as a result, we've decided to increase the number to 350,000 because the contribution of immigrants is so overwhelmingly positive. One thing that I've noticed anecdotally is this idea of the family business, where part of the business is located in Serbia and part of it is in Canada. We see this especially in the high-tech sector, but even in other sectors as well, where you're not even sure where the owners and the people who manage this company actually live because they spend lots of time in both countries. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of data to really capture how significant a phenomena this is, which brings me to the two questions I have about the methodology of studying this problem of out-migration. One is, if you look at the data provided by the State Statistical Office of the Republic of Serbia, there is no out-migration. You just see a steady decline of 35,000 people per year in the population, which is due entirely to natural decrease. One would think that the job of qualified, skilled demographers is to actually come up with decent population estimates. Is anybody on the panel able to provide a best estimate of what the annual net loss of population is from Serbia? My second question, both to Alida and to Petar, you mentioned impotence and loss of hope as a motivation for out-migration. We know from studies of consumer behavior, and we know from studies of voter behavior, that people are not very good or very accurate in explaining the motivations for their actions. They make stuff up, they rationalize. They either lack the insight to truly pronounce the reasons for their actions, or they feel obliged to provide the answer that they think the questioner wants to hear. So when you say that loss of hope, loss of or feelings of impotence are a driver of out-migration, on what is that based? How have you been able to verify that this is actually the true motivation?
Shall we do the video?
Please, can you start from the back, and then in the meantime, we can think about this million-dollar question about the actual data of how many people have left.
I'll just answer when it comes to data. The thing is, as I mentioned before, this is a big problem because there's no way to track who has left the country because people just buy the airplane ticket and leave. I can tell you my personal example. When I was studying abroad, for the country of Serbia, for the system, I was still here, not going to school, not doing anything, but I lived here. There was no requirement for me to say, I'm out of the country, bye. I'll be back in or I will not be back. It's just impossible to track. And this is why this data is just an estimate. This is just a guess. We have some estimates that are based on some methodologies that are relatively new, but other than that, the data, we need to find a way. One of the things that we definitely need to be working on, not only establishing how many people leave, one of the things that I will be focusing on in the organization is that we need to map where the people are. We know, like, by rough, there's people in Canada, there's people in the US, we know numbers about, but it's not the precise data. So mapping that and understanding, because you have to derive knowledge from the data and the facts that you have. And at the moment, we have some slim data. So to answer, I don't think any of us can actually come up with.
Well, on the data, we have here somebody from the Institute for Research and Development. They were doing some of the costing analysis. So they were looking at estimates from OECD and World Bank and IMF. And I know that there's no hard data. There's some approximate data. So maybe Nenad can share a couple of that data which is out there. But even this, because one of the reasons, and I have to say why we did the costing, I listened very carefully about the comments on putting a price tag on a person leaving, and that wasn't our intention. We didn't want to put a price tag, but the reason why we did costing, because it was so much easier than to actually find the data on how many people are leaving, because you have a lot of economic data and you can probably cost this per capita a lot easier than trying to find the actual data on how many people are leaving. I mean, Nenad, you probably have the numbers in the study there, but there's a couple of estimates, one from OECD and one by the UN.
Sorry? Thank you very much. Nenad Jevtovic from Institute for Development and Innovation. And between 15 and 45,000 people leave Serbia every year.
Please,
May I just also
please, Alida.
chip in? Yeah, roughly that's the number, because I was also, it very much depends what source you're looking at, which makes it even more complicated. To make that even more complicated, it's not only the Western Balkans. States are generally very bad at looking at outward immigration, right? So they're counting with their censuses and surveys, household and administrative surveys, they're counting who's in rather than who's out. There was an attempt a couple of years ago on the European level to sort of synchronize a level of statistics, because for, let's say, Norway is using still old registers, and Germany is using something else, and other countries using something else. There was an attempt that failed because each and every country has its own system. So you can come up actually as two people instead of one if the period of time they're counting is less than 6 months. So there is a complication of that sort too. When it comes to the Western Balkans, it really depends what you're looking at. I was doing it for Bosnia. If you're looking at the statistics of the civil society organizations, you will come up with hundreds of thousands of people left in the last 5 years. If you're looking at deregistration, which is basically what we have described previously, but you have no incentive to do it unless you're actually aiming for the citizenship of the other country. And by the way, it costs quite a lot. If you want to deregister, you have to pay quite a lot. There are only 12,000 deregistration in the last couple of years in Bosnia. So according to Bosnian official statistics, only 12,000 people left in the last couple of years. And then you have Eurostat, and then you have OSCE, and then you have the World Bank. And they're all looking from their point of view, remittances, labor markets, and so forth. So it really depends on the source. One good thing about it is that, and this is what I have written quite a lot about, Eurostat, every single country in this region is basically on the way to the European accession process, or it's in the accession process. Eurostat is a major actor in this place. It's basically where the statistics are being held. They have a role, and they're very well placed to basically take over the story about statistics and synchronize statistics on a regional level. That did not happen yet. So they also, there is a lot of potential there. I think if we, as a government of the region, basically come up front and say that this is one thing that we have no disputes over, that we would want to have solid statistics, this could be one thing that we're working on in the next couple of years. As for your second question about impotence, loss of hopelessness, and how we basically call it, there are surveys being done here and there from the Regional Cooperation Council to some surveys that I've actually read relatively recently in Croatia. That is a fascinating country because it has always been, or not always been, but certainly until 2013, it has been basically a light to look upon in terms of European accession process. Then it basically entered the European Union, and we have seen the experiences with immigration. There you can find really good surveys being done at different levels about why people are leaving. And this is where you can find that the economic factor is not prevalent, but you have others, including religion, basically not feeling part of the group unless you're part of the religious group. Or suppressing freedoms, or corruption. These are the top issues that are coming up, not necessarily economic ones.
Yeah, maybe just to add, I mean, of course, it's very difficult to measure the lack of hope. How do you measure this feeling? But as Alida said, there are surveys. A lot of things were done through the Regional Cooperation Council. As I mentioned, the number 42% of young people in the Western Balkans doesn't want to get involved with the politics. They have no political engagement. They don't want to even hear about being involved with politics. So this is one, number which shows you that they are more or less in apathy in terms of their social life and social interaction and trying to change things in the Balkans. But there are also, this phenomenon of migration of young people, of lack of hope, lack of perspective. We are dealing with that, at least, in terms of being institutionalized about that since 2014, 2013, when we set up in European Union the Berlin process together with the Western Balkans, 6 countries. And, we had, I think, at least 100 meetings which I attended. So you had like 1,000 meetings with young people where you talked with them, when you ask them what is their general feeling about living in the Western Balkans or why they want to migrate. And as Alida said, economic reasons are important, but they're not the only ones.
You wanted to answer?
Yeah, briefly. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that Eurostat can be helpful here. And if I would just recommend here something to do with just OECD data rather, in my opinion, they are much better. And you're absolutely right. The quality of immigration data is usually much better than the quality of immigration data. And additionally, what really matters is if we talk about flows or stocks. The problem is that if we just consider migration with the free mobility regimes, flow data is usually of very bad quality. So what you can do, you can just refer to stocks. And in case of Poland, in fact, we have a very good experience here, because National Statistical Office of Poland is providing every year an estimate of the stock of Poles staying abroad. And so it's doable. How you do this? You just start from the census data, then you consider natural change, then you add data from labor force surveys, and then you consider mirror statistics from major destination countries. So it's doable. That's the point. And additionally, for example, if you just speak about the size of diaspora, I would definitely consider the case of Latvia. A few years back, they just completed a survey. It was called Latvians Abroad or something like that. It was just a large-scale survey, quite successful, and that provided us a lot of information on Latvians living abroad.
I read that one.
You have a question here?
Yeah, I'm coming from the Embassy of Slovenia. I just have maybe one suggestion. There's a really easy survey you can make in a short period of time, and it'll get you really a good number or estimation on how big the immigration is here. If you collect the data from the embassies, because every immigrant has to get some working permit or something like that. So, because I see the figures last year, I don't know if anybody of you would get a decent estimation how many people went through our embassy just to Slovenia. It's 7,000. So just to Slovenia. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody ended in Slovenia. They might continue their way forward, but that's the number of working permits we issued last year only in Slovenian embassy.
May I just comment on this briefly? In last Sunday, we had elections in Poland. In the UK, the number of people who registered was just 100,000, and the stock is estimated to be around 1 million.
Yeah.
So that is just the...
You guys are in the EU, that's why it's a little bit maybe different. But we tried, we talked to some embassies, and we've tried to ask them about the numbers, and they don't even have the right information, because we tried, I'm telling you an example from last week, that we tried to talk to one embassy and says, do you know how many applicants for visas? Like, it's down per county, it's down, the data is there, but it's not unified, and we're talking about a large country, so.
And unless you... go ahead.
I was just going to say you have quite a few people with dual nationalities,
Yeah.
so they wouldn't necessarily be registered as Serbians in another member state. They could be Slovenians, Hungarians, or anything else. So that's another issue. But also, unless I absolutely have to go to the embassy to take my or to renew my passport, I usually do it in Serbia because it's easier for me, and then I get to see the family, etc. You don't then have the registration within the embassy, and that's where the voting system could help. But every time I need to vote, I have to register again. So it's as if I don't exist there, even though I have voted, for example, quite a few times. And the other option is you have a lot of people who don't go to the embassies at all for whatever reason, but they go to the church, but the church doesn't want to share the data. So you have potentially places where you could collect it, but it's really difficult to actually get it. So unfortunately, it isn't as straightforward as I mean, it sounds brilliant, but it's unfortunately not doable.
May I just add one thing? There has been also very little effort in this regard, because as Natasha rightly pointed out, unless you really have to interact with your embassy, you wouldn't. You wouldn't appear there. You wouldn't be on their register of any kind. You would appear on a register of your district where you live, because this is where the services are. So if you live in Austria, if you live in Slovenia, if you live in Germany, you would come to you would go to your district to get child support. You would get assistance with I don't know, accommodation. You would get all sorts of services, and this is where you would get into the system. And I haven't seen an organized effort by any of the countries of the Western Balkans to actually, approach to these very sort of local, municipal even units or entities to actually extract that data.
Thank you. One final round of questions, if we have them, and please, we have one here, one here, one here. 3 more. Yes? Anybody else? Okay, let's start from there.
Thank you. My name is Maja Biel from Belgrade Center for Security Policy. You provoked me actually to ask you several questions, but for each of you. I will address the first question to Pavel, because you mentioned matching labor needs with educational systems. So my question is actually, are we in future educating future workers or future citizens? So if we educate future workers, then we maybe don't need civic education, or we can have a move as the Orban, shut down or cancel gender studies, or maybe even go further to shut down departments for philosophy of sociology, because this is also part of the discussion in Serbia as well. And how do you think gig economy will influence on migration issue? Alida, you mentioned one good thing, that usually immigration comes with the problem of depopulation. And what do you think about moves that actually, or some things that populist leaders actually advocate in our region as well, and that they see as they want to tackle both problem with rather population policy than economic social policies, and how that influence on, for example, on women and women's rights, because this is also an issue with the right-wing governments as well. One thing, maybe Natasha, for you, because you're living in London, actually, how to tackle fears from migrants and from the people they're coming, maybe at the EU level, or you can narrow it down only to the UK case, for example, because I believe that's also important thing to tackle if we want to speak about migration thing. And I believe that only Peter, in a one way, tried to, very polite, diplomatic way, try to see the elephant in the room. I believe because like many people from the Balkans leave because not because they want, because they find that they have there is need for people to leave, and they are leaving mostly because of the regime, and nobody actually mentioned it directly, because like we are not living in democracy, and democracy that we lived in is not democracy that we want in the future, and institutions actually that we have at the moment, we cannot quick fix them at the moment, and people don't see their future in the society or the countries at the moment, so that they decide actually to find a better place to stay or work. And I believe this kind of issue is not really addressed properly at this panel. I don't know whether you tackle it within your research and within your data, so like roots and causes of the problems, but I believe that we need to see that elephant in the room is also one of the important factor of why people leave from this region. Thank you.
Can we take the other two questions and then we'll get people to answer all of them? So we have a question here and we have a question there. Can we get the speaker here? Thank you.
My name is Sanja Torov. I'm a political analyst, so I tend to think that statistics is not devoid of politics. We haven't been discussing it this evening, but I think there is merit in thinking about that as well. Also, what Ivan was saying about the project supporting diaspora coming back, and I think one of the issues that people in Serbia at least might have is not having that type of support whilst living here, so knowing where to access any kind of support for their studies or labor markets and so on. But what I think we may be unconsciously always discussing when discussing migration or emigration from the Balkans is we are talking about highly educated people, but actually what I feel may need to be addressed more urgently is the fact that uneducated or less educated skilled workers are those that might leave the Western Balkan countries without being able to function. Because conceptually it's interesting to work on supporting highly educated people to come back, but at least for some of the, for example, health centers in Belgrade, and I can imagine it's much worse in the rural areas, there are no specialist doctors anymore. So we are looking into an urgent crisis that might even get worse as of 1st of January, when Germany is to open ability for people to go and look for jobs. So I was wondering what you think about these issues of actually not being able to find a carpenter or something like that, that is not really directly related to leadership of the country, but to what people are facing every day. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, question here.
All right. My name is Nikola Lazic. I'm coming from the Faculty of Law in Belgrade. I'm a student at the 4th year. First, I would like to address the Canadian friend and to tell him about the motivation. It's not just the economic reasons, it is really the feeling of impotence to really make a change, because there is a tradition here, the political tradition of people who are, so to say, ruling in, and I'm sure that this doesn't stay only for Serbia. I'm sure that this can be applied to Montenegro, of course, Albania and other countries in the region. And there is something called prekoveze. In English, you can say that people are gaining jobs through connections, and that is the pretty much basic, that is the means of getting a job in a public sector mostly. So that is you can hear it in my voice. So I am going to be a member of the private sector. And I would like to say thank you to all of the speakers. We had a really a conversation on a very high level, and I'm really impressed that almost anybody didn't intercept anyone else. We really had a beautiful conversation, and a huge thank you from the heart. And the last thing, I really thought of this question at the end. I didn't want to just to speak, to take the microphone just to speak. So, and the question is, how do you think we can engage young people and make them care? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have, I think, 5 questions coming your way and a general question. So first, if we can take the 3 questions that were asked by the lady in the corner, and then we can move on to these 2. There are some specific questions, I think, coming Pavel's way, Alida's way, and Natasha's way from the researcher from the Belgrade Center for Security Studies. Security policy, sorry. So there's a question coming to Pavel and Alida and Natasha, please.
I can start. I'm afraid we could just spend the whole time here discussing this particular question. And as for me, there are at least two levels of discussion here. And the first one is just purely a structural issue. It's about aspirations of people. And it's just, this is just a tension being visible not only in Balkans, so not only in Poland, but just overall, I guess, not only in Europe. The problem is that young people, they have higher and higher aspirations, so that's why they acquire tertiary education. And still, this is not fully matched with labor market needs, unfortunately. This is, as I said, this is one of the major drivers for migration. People are leaving because their aspirations are higher than labor market opportunities, simply. And in short term, this is what really matters. And I'm not that sure if we can manage it properly, in fact. Because I wouldn't say that we can just limit aspirations of people. This is what they want. They want to have higher education, for example. However, what is maybe more important is the long-term perspective. Labor markets are changing. And problem is that we don't know how they will change. For example, just to give you a basic example, there are some estimates regarding future demand on labor. And those estimates, they vary between 10 to 50% decline. So this is what we expect if we consider automation and just artificial intelligence or sort of. So we simply don't know. That's the problem. You ask about gig or platform economy. We don't know. This is just a process in the making. We just observe it. So my answer, you just ask how we should educate our people. My answer would be in the most flexible way possible. They should be ready to adjust to changing conditions. I don't know if it's a good answer for you, but this is what I would say for now. Mm-hmm. But that's very demanding. Particularly if just, you are young people here in the room. And this is what I also say always to my students. You are in a very difficult position now.
Okay. On that optimistic note, we're going to move forward to Alida.
So you're in a very, very difficult position. I will get back to you later because I really think you have a $1 million question with how to re-energize young people and how to make them basically want to stay and do something.
Don't put a price tag on it.
But I won't put any price tags. But let me get back to the question that I got, very specific one. It's super complex. Basically, you're asking me how the populists are coupling these two, immigration and the population, and what's the role of women. Let me just share a story from a couple of years ago when Turkish President Erdogan was coming to Sarajevo University in front of hundreds of students. Of all the things he could have said to those students, he basically decided to say and send a message that every single one of them should have at least 3 children. Is that a populist way to tackle depopulation? Maybe. If countries are serious about these trends, first thing first, going back to what we have been discussing for an hour and a half now, we should look at the data. Data are really frightening on the population. Even if we exclude the fact that people do not want to stay in the region for all sorts of reasons, reasons, you have this issue that is purely related to the fact that there are only that many people, there is only that percentage of fertility rate, and that we are, within the next couple of decades, are gonna shrink significantly as populations. And if we're serious about it, then we have to start building up policies around it. It really comes down to that. How to do that? I mean, Germany has realized that, and it really sort of, connects to your question. Germany realized that first it didn't, and then it did. And in the last couple of years introduced really aggressive measures. And basically what you're seeing now, us being left without services, there are no doctors, no pediatricians. Just a couple of days ago, I've just read the news that in Zenica city, which is a small city in Bosnia, around 100,000 people, has lost neuropediatric surgeon or neurosurgeon for small children. And basically, the notice is that there is no such person anymore. So the next stop would be Sarajevo. And if you cannot find in Sarajevo, then you're going to have to look further on. That basically also makes people want to leave, because they are left without services. If you have a sick child, your priority will be to actually go elsewhere where there are such services in place. And what Germany basically did is that it calculated very simple numbers, and it realized that it has shrinking population, very old population, and they all need care. This is a very specific care, and where to get that care. So it's either Cuba, Vietnam, or the Western Balkans. And it's kind of convenient and more nearby to get it from the Western Balkans. So you have basically policies in place to attract people that will take care of the elderly. And there are numbers, and I won't go into that because I have just recently written a paper exactly about this. It's going to be out very soon, about services that we're losing and how that really affects people on the ground, entire families. So I don't think we have even started this debate about depopulation and migration. But if we're discussing populist sort of narratives, yes, I mean, anything from building such buildings to, having 3 children per whatever family and everything in between. But that doesn't mean, that these are serious thoughts.
Thank you. Natasha?
If I understood correctly, you were asking how in the UK they're tackling the fear of immigration and whether there is anything for me being foreigner there as well. I mean, if I just tell you a story, I'm a female, I'm a foreigner, and I work for the British government. The only question I was asked, can you actually do the job? And that's all they really cared about. And that's the level of fear of immigration, if I can put it that way. You do hear in media, all these Eastern Europeans or wherever from are coming to take our jobs, but actually, job market is quite big. And if you do have what they need, whatever talent that is, you will get the opportunity. And that might be linked to something that you've said in a way as well, Nicola. Why did I stay in the UK? Nobody asked me anything. I didn't have to say, oh, I know so-and-so, potentially. I didn't have, I'm not saying it's happening in Serbia all the time, but it never even crossed my mind in the UK that I have to provide some kind of a connection. All I needed to provide were references that could be easily checked. Where did you finish your university? Who did you work for before? What are your transferable skills that you can actually apply in this job? And if that fits what they need, and if you fit the personality that they need for that particular team, you're in. And that's all there is to it. But just coming back to your question as well, I really, really liked it. And it's right that you've asked it as well. How do we engage you more? Well, we need to talk to you. We don't know what you need, and how will I know what you need if I don't talk to you? I need to listen to you, not just me, all of us. And that's actually across the system, not necessarily just about immigration, but everything. What are your fears? What are your ambitions? What do you want to do? Do you need to talk to somebody who lives abroad? Do you need to talk to somebody who works in the sector that you're interested in? How do we make those connections? Which was the point that I was making about what's actually already available in Serbia. How do we make sure that people we have here, well, you might want to go, and why not? Get in the experience, but then that you can come back without facing the prejudices that I've kind of unlisted that are still happening, and that our members are continuously feeding back to us. This isn't like 10 years ago this happened. It's still happening today. So hopefully we can improve it. One way to improve it is to talk about it and to break down the barriers that exist, which are just barriers and misunderstandings for most of the time, because we haven't, or we spoke but we didn't hear what the other one said. We only wanted to say something without hearing what you really wanted to pass on as a message.
Peter, you had a comment?
I mean, again, it's a perception what Natasha was saying about Britain and the migrant issue. I mean, at the end of the day, migration issue and the fear from the migration was one of the most important things why the Brits voted to leave European Union. So, you know, I mean, perception is always an interesting thing. What I wanted to say politely again, because I'm a diplomat, and it's not concerning only Western Balkans, but Europe as a whole, if you want. We are, you know, going in a direction where the world is changing, or, you know, Europe is changing so fast that in 5 to 10 years we are going to live in totally different society that we are living right now. With artificial intelligence, digitalization and everything, we are going to be a society which is going to be totally different. I mean, if we are looking at what is happening in China, if you are looking at what is happening around the world, and you know, you can't be immune to that. You can't be immune to that even in the Western Balkans. But you know, in the Western Balkans, we are still talking about the things from the past, and we are not talking about the things of the future. And this is, I think, one of the most important things. And the second, which is even more important, in all this innovation, in all these reforms that we are doing, in all these incentives, in all these things, we shouldn't lose sight of one thing, and this is democracy. Because democracy is giving hope. And you can have ecosystem which is working, which is in place, but if you don't have it coupled with democracy, then you have a problem. At least in this part of the world.
Thank you, Peter. And any final answers to the question on engaging young people?
I just had one sentence response to your question is like, we need to listen and not just record what people are saying, not like register, actually listen. Actually, and then letting young people do what they want to. Not only young, everybody will be just listening to what other counterparts people have to say, and that's to answer your question.
Thank you, Ivan. Well, on that note, I will now close the panel. Again, I would like to thank the Belgrade Security Forum for allowing us and providing us the venue for this discussion. I would like to thank Alida, Pavel, Natasha, Ivan, Petar, again, for your contributions. Thank you for coming, some of you from far away, to be here with us. And thank you all, the entire audience, for staying with us in this late hour. I think I failed spectacularly as a moderator because I've extended for 45 minutes. But I'll take some success in that we've had a very positive... Yes. We had a positive discussion. So thank you, everybody.